Welcome to Teach Me to Dad. I'm Kurtis. If you're joining us for the first time, we're kind of in between seasons. We're in the off season between normal chatting to different dads. And so what I'm doing in the off season is looking at different passages in the Bible that have key things to say about being a dad or parenting, and just drawing out some of the things that the Bible has to say. Before I get into it, big thank you to those of you who have contributed to the GoFundMe. Particularly just want to spread the word for this podcast to dads who may not know about it, may not have connections and peer groups of Christian dads. So that's the plan for that, to do that once season 2 starts. So thank you, to those of you who have contributed. And I'll put the link there if that's something that you want to contribute to as well. This week, I want to look at Deuteronomy chapter 6. This is a classic passage in the scriptures about parenting. And so, a bit of context for Deuteronomy. God's people, they've had the Exodus out of Egypt. They've been in the wilderness for 40 years, and they're about to enter the promised land, so they can enjoy and live in a relationship with God in his land, under his rule, enjoying life with him. And before they go to the promised land, you get Deuteronomy. You kind of get God re-giving them the law, the 10 Commandments, but lots of laws expanded out of that. And so there's differences to our context now, after Jesus has fulfilled the law and we're under a different covenant. But you'll see as we go through this, you can't miss the principles that apply to us as parents. So I'll start reading and we'll make some observations along the way. So Deuteronomy 6, verse 1. Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land which you are going over to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son and your son's son, by keeping all the commandments which are commanded of you, all the days of your life, and that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, the first thing to notice of that is the call to obey is something for their sons and their sons' sons. And it's partly a principle you can see that they all need to obey. But it's got implicit in here is that my obedience will affect my kids' future obedience and their kids' future obedience. It shows how important our obedience is and the impact that will have on our children. That if we are unfaithful, we'll lead our children that way. If we are faithful, it will have that impact on our children. Now, I'll keep reading. Verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. Now pause. This is the big command for this passage. There is one God. The Lord is our God. He is one. And because he's one, the next thing follows that there is total obedience. We love him with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our might, because we're not divided between many allegiances. The Lord is one. He gets our everything. And they're to be on your heart more than surface level. Let me keep reading. Verse 7. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit down in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. This is why it's a big passage for parenting. You shall teach them diligently the words that God commands them. it's a strong phrase. It tells us that there's a teach them as of highest importance with great intention and execution. Teach them diligently. Work very hard to teach and pass on the words that God's commanded us obey to our children. And then it lists a bunch of things. And the point, I think, is overkill it. Don't underdo it. To teach them diligently. And it just lists a bunch of ways teach them in all aspects of life. Put these words around everywhere. Talk about them when you're sitting down. Talk about them when you're walking. Talk about them when you lie down. Talk about them when you get up. Put them physically around the place. Put signs on your hands. Put them between your eyes. Put them around the house. Overkill the teaching of these words. Overdo it. No, you can't overdo it. You know what I mean? Do lots. Be diligent about it. That's kind of the key parenting passage, Deuteronomy 6. This call was a huge deal. It's tied to what could be one of the most important Old Testament passages for Israel. That's 6 verse 4, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That's the mantra. That's a big deal. That's a key identity, is hearing that. And so that stands as a big part in Deuteronomy for the law. And then followed by the greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God. It's almost the broad banner for teaching of the law, and then is tied very clearly to the importance of pass this on to your children. So I think this passage shows just the great importance of teaching the words of God to our children and teaching them to obey him and to fear him. And Israel at the time, I think they would get the importance of this. I was going to say they don't take it for granted, but maybe in their heart they would. But in Deuteronomy, they've just gone through the book of Numbers. Disobedience has left their past generation dead in the wilderness. Imagine if you knew that your own dad died of disobedience. How would that motivate your own obedience and what you pass on to your kids? That's the seriousness that this comes to them with. The disobedience of the previous generation left them cut off from the promised land, and a generation died in the wilderness. This is a generation of people who have seen a generation die, the generation above them die from disobedience, and they're called obey. Make sure your children obey so it goes well for you. I think in the kids' years, at least for me, and I know for many others that I talk to, it can be easy to just survive kids, particularly in the early years, but there's different challenges that come along. That I hear that every year brings its own challenges, but it can be easy to just survive. But this passage calls us to keep in the front of our mind to obey the Lord ourselves and to teach our kids diligently his words and to obey him. It just captures the seriousness of this, how tightly this is caught up in how we love the Lord our God with our lives, the greatest commandment we have. So dads, I hope you take seriously the call. I hope you hold to this diligently. You teach your kids diligently. You think, how can I do this? That it's in the front of your mind, that you do all that you can. I hope you take the front foot on this and you make sure you're taking initiative for the teaching of God's words to your kids. I hope you're feeling that as you see Deuteronomy 6. That's definitely what stood out for me. The seriousness, the importance, diligence. There you go. Go well on that, dads. I'm praying, praying for those who are listening to this, that you work hard to do that and that God helps you to teach your kids diligently so that your kids can live faithful lives, trusting the Lord Jesus and seeking to please and obey him as well. Go get them. See you next week.